Okay, we're good to go. Yes. No, I was hoping you would say something. Yes. And I'll repeat it for the video.
Next week, Monday night. And I was thinking yesterday, Baruch Hashem, we're finalizing that campaign, it. And I was thinking how Avram, before he died, he was, I should say, driving me crazy because he just wanted to get a driver's license. I was thinking, 18, but he had started mentioning about a car, and I'm like, Avram, you got an every track.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, we're very excited about that. Actually, going to be living at the upshore.
So,
not at the
hi. So Rhonda was mentioning, just so for the purpose of the tape, that Lamed Sivan is going to be would have been Avram's 18th birthday, and they're about to finish up a campaign for an ambitractor, sorry, in his memory. And just also as an aside, on Sunday, Bezrat Hashem, the part of the Amit school where I teach, will be doing a special run/walk for in his memory as well. So it's all a lot of nice things coming to fruition here, Baruch Hashem. Today, of course, we learned the Ilu Nishmat Avigdor Chai Avram Ben Rachel Leah Avigdor Meir Tzvi, and it's also right in front of me. I could look. By the way, there's something to be said about that. I'll tell you in a second. And we will be starting on page chapter 22. Tell you where we are. We're near the end of chapter 22. We're on page 142 in the small book, starting with the paragraph V'hakavod. So I have a theory why I often stumble over Avram's name. And I've mentioned this before in other contexts. No, not because it's just so many names, but because of the fact that there's a concept that the more important something is, the more the Satan tries to levalbel, to mess you up. So this is very important. His name, a person's name, is very important. I had one occasion once where in the shul in Chicago, it was an oath for first. I don't remember exactly what it was, and I'm pretty good with memory of names for some reason, except for this, obviously. And for some reason, off the top of my head, I decided to wish a mazal tov to one of the family members, and his father, who had recently passed away. I mentioned, his father. And I mentioned the name as the words are coming out of my mouth. I said, "That's not his name. It's not right." But I didn't remember what it was. I sat down, and then I got back up before I don't alum. I said, "I apologize in public. You don't want to ever have, especially in that kind of situation, when it's a simcha and the memory of somebody, to say the wrong name." So, okay, they still talk to me. Thank God. Okay, finishing up this chapter today and moving on then to chapter 23, Bezrat Hashem. We are dealing with the topic of anava, of humility, and various things that we have to be careful of in our actions in order to make sure that we live a life that professes and actually puts into action the sense of being humble. Again, for those of you who've heard me say it, I'll say it for the 3,000th time. There's a gigantic difference between proud and being full of pride. I can be or haughtiness. I can be proud of what I've accomplished. You should be proud of what you accomplished, but you should never make it like, "Wow, I'm the best thing since sliced bread." I don't remember where that expression comes from. One of the things that it says that I don't understand. I have so many things to ask people who've written Svarim that are no longer alive, especially our Chashochem, but I'll leave that for I want to ask the Ramchal why he did not include a certain phrase in this next paragraph, and I'll explain what it is in a minute. The next thing is a kavod, the concept of a person being honored or being treated with honor. Now, we are supposed to respect each other, with no doubt, and that's going to be actually the next paragraph, which says achelak harvi'i. But the kavod here we're talking about is allowing kavod to go to your head. Kavod eno ela havel havalim. It's vanity of vanities, which obviously comes from Kohelet. Hamavirat adam al da'ato dal dat kono. What does it do? It removes a person from his mind. What does that mean? And from the mind of God. It means that he becomes full of himself, and therefore there's no space for God in that equation. And he makes him it causes him to forget what he really is here in this world for. Someone who does realized he has this character trait that he's kind of getting to a point where he's thinking, well, I'm pretty cool. I'm really worthy of all these accolades. He should be disgusted by it. He should hate it. Now, many of you remember Rabbi Marcus, or Eliyahu Marcus, Zichrono Livracha, lived in our building. He said, I've heard many occasions from him that when he would speak at a bar mitzvah, that either he said it publicly or he went to the boy afterwards. He said, they said a lot of really nice things about you at your bar mitzvah. He says, don't bring that abomination into your home. What did he mean by that? He says, you're 13 years old. Okay, you have accomplished some things. It's great what you did, but don't let it go to your head. Don't bring that home to the point where you become so full of yourself that, you're able to look down your nose at people. I like that. I actually made it.
13 did all the things that they say.
True. That's true. It's yeah. Im kol hakavod. That's right. Sometimes hard to imagine people 63, 65, and 70. Okay. When people do give you this praise and shower you accolades, it should be a burden to you. When he sees that what they're saying really isn't even true. He only can be embarrassed by it. And he can be grown over it. And not just is it bad that he's missing, he doesn't really have what they're praising him for. But rather than piling on more false praise in order to be destroyed, but that's not really what it means. It basically is saying like this: you should want this to not exist. You should want this to be gone. There is something known as the imposter syndrome. Let's assume for a moment someone's the CEO of a corporation, multi-million-dollar corporation. This could be a doctor, it could be a lawyer, it could be an accountant, it could be a teacher, it could be any person of a profession who people look to them that they're good at what they do. But inside, they look at themselves like, I'm really not that good. I just feel like a fraud. Okay, this is a very common thing. So that's also not good. Because again, you have to be self-aware of who you are and what you have accomplished. It's a very fine line. It really is. Now, what am I surprised that the Ramchal did not include in here? It says, there's a phrase that's mentioned in multiple places, which means jealousy, the desire to be honored and let it go to your head, and ta'ava, the lustful desires and all, take a person out of this world. That's a pretty strong statement, and I don't know why he didn't include it. But I will add one thing that I said. This wasn't an original thought. I saw it, and I used it at the shir years ago. It's not just that they take you out of this world, but they accompany you into the next world. That still causes you problems in Olam Haba. So you can be very careful in the context of what we're talking about today of allowing things to go to your head to be proud of yourself, but don't get full of yourself. Now, the other side of the coin, you might think like, okay, I don't want people to praise me and I don't want to get all this. You know what? Let's level the playing field. I'm not going to say nice things about anybody either. The heck with it. I don't want it to go to your head. I'm a tzaddik. I don't want to make you go to, get all full of yourself. No, this is the opposite. Being a mensch. You have to treat every person, man, woman, child, Jew, non-Jew, with respect, except the Yamach Shemams. They could all rot. Aside, it says in Masechet Avot, Perkei Avot, Masechet Avot, who's considered honored? Those who honor God's creatures, each other. Furthermore, they said, how do we know that a person knows of another individual who knows one thing more than they do? That you have to give that person respect, and he gives a couple of examples. What does that mean? There's nobody who doesn't know at least one thing more than you. Everybody knows something you don't, right? I can tell you the source of the word calculate. Where does it come from? This is actually a cute little story. I'll tell you because you asked. Calculus, calculate, where's it come from? So a calculator, we know it means to do an accounting of something, to count, to figure out where's it come from. So my understanding, I used to have these books about this thick, no exaggeration, this thick of trivia. I love trivia. Some of it sticks in my head. Actually, most of it sticks in my head. What Rashi says in last week's parsha, gone, right? But these things stick in my head. Anyways, so in ancient Rome, they were trying to determine, obviously on their chariots, they didn't have odometers that told them how many miles, kilometers they traveled. So they worked out some kind of a thing that they attached to with one of the chariot wheels, two cups, a cup on the top and a cup on the bottom. It was attached with whatever. And they put little pebbles inside. And somehow mathematically, they were able to figure out that every time it made an X amount of revolutions, the cup would tip. Again, I'm simplifying. I'm sure it was much more complicated. One pebble into the bottom cup, based on the size of the wheel, the amount of pebbles, they'd be able to figure out the distance they traveled. The word for those pebbles in Greek, or Latin rather, was calculus. Yeah, so that's where that comes from. So now you will not know anything about the Ramchal, what he said, but you'll know what the word calculate came from. And a flash in the pan, all these expressions, it's like, I love them. They're interesting. Okay, anyways, you should always be the first to say, hi, how are you? Manishma, shalom aleichem. You get on a bus, you go into the store, you see your friend, you wherever it is, say hello. Smile. Be a good person. We also have an expression that is Derech Eretz Kodma Torah. He's mentioned it multiple times. The Derech Eretz, just giving the proper respect, comes before the Torah. What does that mean? It means that in Yiddish, there's an expression, Ersh sei a Mensch. First thing is, be a Mensch. You can't translate Mensch. No, Mensch is a Mensch. They said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who, as I mentioned to you before, is one of my biggest heroes in Jewish history. Nobody ever beat him to the punch. He always said hello first. Now, who was he? He was the man who saved Judaism. After the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, he is the one that requested from the Roman governor to allow him to reestablish Yerushalayim in Yavne. Snuli Yavne v'chachameh. Give me Yavne and its chachamim, it's sages. Why? He reestablished Judaism there, because after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the second one, it looked like everything was lost. I mean, that wasn't just a show. It was the center of Judaism. Law, love, korbanot, everything was there, and it was gone. And he was afraid that the Jewish people would lose their hope in life. And so he decides to reestablish some form of Yerushalayim in Yavne. And the things that we say we do that are zecher lemikdash, the reminders of things that we had at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, almost all of them are done because of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted them. The fact that we take a lulav every day of the week during Sukkot, I almost said Pesach, every day of the week, you might, maybe Machmir, is because of zecher lemikdash. That's how it was done in the Beit HaMikdash. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, it wasn't done that way. It was, I'm sorry, outside the Beit HaMikdash area. So he was a hero. He was a massive person. And yet, he's the first one I'll say say hello. Speaking of saying hello, there's a halacha that many people are not aware of. I like to try to make them aware of. When an individual is in their Shnat Evel, in their year of mourning, you do not say to that person, Shalom Aleichem. It's asur she'ilat shalom, asking a person, not just how you doing. I'm not talking about that. Hey, how you doing? It's like really more of an inquiry, like how are you, and you're allowed to do it in an empathetic way, how you feel. But the usage of the words in general, Shalom Aleichem, to a mourner is not appropriate. So I asked a question years ago by Ashkenazim, at Kiddush Levana on Motzei Shabbat after new moon, a few days after. There's a process called Kiddush Levana. You make certain brachot, and then in the part of that ceremony is you say Shalom Aleichem to 3 people. So can you say it to someone who's a mourner? So I found out the answer is yes, you're allowed to in that context. But in general, you don't say. So what I tend to do is, hey, I'm not saying Shalom Aleichem, something like that. Anyways, Va'afilu goy bashuk. Look what he says. You might think, well, among our people, you got to be good and smile and say how you doing and Shalom Aleichem. The non-Jews, okay, whatever they say, they don't. No. What was the Mishnah? It's a Mishnah in Avot. What did it say? We said it before. It said, doesn't say every Jew, it says everybody. It's also mitnei darkei shalom. There are things we do to keep peace with the non-Jewish world. Whether it has to do with the way you speak or the way you act. You have to be respectful to your friends. Always act respectfully. You don't call them names. You're not allowed to, let's say someone has a nickname. And people have been used to calling the person for years. And then one day the person says, I got to tell you honestly, I really don't like that nickname. That's it. You're no longer allowed to use that name. It then becomes asur to use that name. You can't call someone by a kinui, a nickname, if they don't like it. Very important. We also know that the 24,000 students, the 12,000 pairs of Rabbi Akiva passed away. That they didn't respect each other. I'm not going to get into that because I've always had a very hard time buying that. Whether it's actually happened, it's an exaggeration, was it a mashal? Okay, the whole Siyat Omer business, I take issue with certain things because I'm such a gadol b'Torah that I can say these, Mr. Anav. But whatever. Okay, so we all know that that this is what occurred. Now he makes the following comparison. Just like Rishaim are more associated with the concept of derision and causing people hardship and pain and hurtful statements, as we mentioned already, the pasuk in Mishlei Rasha ba gam vuz, kena kavod, so too giving honor and respect mitaches al hatzadikim. You might think that now, for those of you who have learned or learned Tanya, you know that we're not talking about the Alter Rebbe's concept of a tzaddik. In the colloquial usage of the word tzaddik, you might think, I can never be a tzaddik. It's beyond me. But a person who treats another individual with respect that's a character trait that's already relatable to a tzaddik. To someone who's very exceedingly pious. Does not mean you could go say shalom aleichem to someone and then stab somebody else in the back. Doesn't mean that. But it means that it's part of who you are. Not everyone is a soft and cuddly and warm, fuzzy kind of person. And if you're not, if you're the type of person who you might be shy. People are shy. They don't want to be the first one to open their mouth. They may say, what if I say good morning to someone, they don't respond, and then they carry that with them all day long. Oh my God, the person didn't say good morning, what they do, right? They live rent-free in someone's head for a little while, right? Because then the kavod lives with them and doesn't separate from them. Now, he comes now to the last paragraph of this chapter, and he gives, this wasn't a very long chapter, but it's about an average length. Remember, 19 was like, it took months to do. But in some of his chapters, not every one, he gives a bit of a summary. He wants to kind of summarize for us here. He says, I gave you until now the general rules and ideas and some of the details of this anava issue. Of all the different subcategories and everything that come along with each category, meaning he's tried his best. Some of them he said, look, I've given you just the basic idea. Now you got to go and add a lot to this. But he's saying, look, I try my best to give you like a really A, B, C, subcategory A, subcategory B, then from B to C to D, to as mefurat as possible. But and based on time and place, a chacham, a wise person, should add to this. Sorry, he should take lessons. He should add to this and also take a lekach. Lekach literally means lakach, it means to take. The word lekach in Hebrew means a lesson. You get a message out of something. This is for sure. That anava, a person who's humble or who acts in a humble way, that will remove from him many stumbling blocks. Not only that, will also bring him closer to many good things. Why? How does that help me? Because if a person is an anav, so like, I don't need all this fancy stuff. I don't need all X. I don't need Y. And what they really think about is yachush me'at al divrei olam. They don't really give a lot of importance to the worldly matters. And then he's not going to be jealous of all the vanity, meaning all the stuff that's out there. We all know people, more so maybe in Chutzlaretz than here, I hope, even though it's not good anywhere, that are always looking, what does the neighbor have? Where's their vacation? What's the new car? What are all the degrees on the wall? At least a tremendous amount of kin'ah. But if I look at someone who has, I'll throw out, what's it called? The fancy car with Elon Musk? Tesla, thank you. And that wasn't a thing. I really couldn't remember the word. A Tesla with all the bells and whistles, and he's got a Countach. You know what a Countach is? That is the Maserati, not Maserati. I forgot which one. Countach is an Italian car that's worth about $100,000. You got you're sitting on the floor of the car. Anyways, you can say, "Whoa, that's a cool car." What's that? A Lamborghini? Thank you, Lamborghini Countach. So, by the way, can I borrow yours? But to say, oh man, I really wish I had that, and be jealous and walk around all day. That's a terrible character trait. That's not lo tachmon. It's not don't covet. That's a shir I gave before. If you want to hear it, I can send you a tape of it. Even though it's not a tape, you know what I mean. But the less you are, not you, but a person feels jealousy about somebody else, what they have, because trust me, nobody, and I mean nobody, would ever want to trade places with another person. Your life is your life. You are here for a tafkid, for a certain position, a certain job, and to do certain things in this world. And as good as some things may seem on the outside, look at all the money, look at the cars, look at the whatever it might be, you don't live that life. You have a different life. And that's what you've been given. That's what you have to deal with the best you can. And when you have that perspective, it reduces the kinah, and it makes you healthier too. It eats away at you, at your neshama, at your psyche. And also a group of those, or the group of the anav, very wonderful, good, sweet people. And people are pleased. I like to see someone who's humble. He also, for sure, will not come to a position of getting angry, normally get into fights. Everything's quiet, nicely. Everything peaceful, restful. This is the first time he said this in his book. Ashrei shezoche lemida zo. Happy is the one who merits this character trait. That's an unbelievable statement. He's been talking about zirizut, zihirut, nikiyut, and all these things we talked about for what, a year and a half, 2 years almost, whatever it is. And it's the first time he's saying, and as far as I remember, it's the only time he says it, even coming up with the others. It's like, wow, what an achievement this would be. And it is not beyond achieving. Little means that which I wrote this down because I wasn't going to remember this by heart. That which wisdom made a wreath for its head, anava made a heel for its sandal. Wisdom is a wreath for the head. What can happen with a wreath? Okay, so the wreath is on the head. It's easily, it can blow off, it can be removed. A person can lose their chokhmah, their wisdom. But what? It withers. But a sandal that is on the sole of the heel of the foot, that's there. It's always there. That becomes a party, this anava, this feeling of humility that will always stay with you. We know, unfortunately, that the way the human mind works, that either as we age, or God forbid, there's illnesses. Aging's not an illness, but there are illnesses involved. It affects the way our memory, it affects the way we think, we act. But if we have certain character traits, and again, barring illnesses, That's who we are. That's our mahut. It's our essence. And when a person is an anav, a person who's humble, there's a famous story of Rav Moshe Feinstein's. There's hundreds of them, but one that I actually tried to put into practice the other day, a week ago. He was getting into a car, into the backseat of the car. Obviously he didn't drive; he had a driver, and he was getting in the backseat of the car. And evidently, the person who was helping him in closed the door on his hand. Didn't scream, didn't say anything. Reopened the door, pulled his hand out. She had it taken care of later. And when the person saw who was taking care of Moshe, like, how did you not scream? He says, I didn't want him to feel bad. That's anava, right? So I had the other day, I actually thought about this story. I didn't do it because of anava. I really did because I want to hurt this kid. This kid was doing something in school, and it was absolutely an accident. If he kicked me or threw a ball, I forgot what it was. And look, and it really did hurt. Look, right? I didn't do it because of me. I did it because for him. And also what we do when we learn these stories about Gedolei Yisrael, try to emulate that. You can be a Moshe Rabbeinu. Rambam says anyone can be a Moshe Rabbeinu, not in Nevuah, not in prophecy, but in knowledge. Everyone has the capacity. So, but Tachlis, most people don't become like that, right? So, but what do we learn from these stories when we heard about Gedolei Yisrael? Try to emulate who they were because we know who they were. So we try to take a little piece of that. And that's what this chapter's been about. This chapter's been about how we relate to other people, how we relate to ourselves. And the worst, though, as he mentioned, is false anava, false humility. It's okay, I don't need it. And inside he's going, he's thinking like, oh, if they only knew who I really was. Don't you know who I am? I'm sure you all heard the joke / story about the test. I'm talking about the test in school, the proctor giving a test. I'll tell you real quickly. So there was a final exam for college that was being given. It was proctored by some teacher, and there was one rule: at 3:00, all the tests had to be handed in. And at 3:00, the bell rings, and everyone hands their test in except one guy. And he keeps working and working. Works 3s, 3:05, 3:10, 3:20. Finally, at 3:30, the guy goes up to give the test to the proctor, says, you failed. So what do you mean I failed? He says, 3:00, that was the rule. He says, do you know who I am? He says, I don't care. Do you know who my father is? I don't care. He says, good. He takes the pile of tests, opens it, shoves his paper in, and closes the pile up. Because obviously the guy didn't know who it was. So like sometimes we think about like, oh, do you know who I am? It's like, but it's also sometimes good to be a little bit anonymous. In that case, it helped the students. Let's go into a little bit of chapter 23. One of his methods in this book has been that after telling us the framework of what we should do, he tells us how to do it, and also along the way, how to avoid any pitfalls. In this chapter, he's going to talk about how we acquire the concept of anava, the midah, the character trait of humility. There are two things that can get a person used to being an anav. Now, I want to point out something important that I don't think I'll find it that fast at the beginning of the book, but if I do, I'll just tell you, and I'll read it to you. No. Okay. He mentioned at the beginning of the book that it is exceedingly difficult to change a character trait. It's easier to memorize all of Shas, all of the Talmud, than it is to make a massive change in your character. It's very difficult. Something that is your nature. If a person is miserly by nature, if a person's an angry person by nature, yes, without going into it again, I don't give my talk about overcoming anger. It was a struggle, obviously, but I don't consider it necessarily it was my nature. So I'm not going to use me as an example. But a person who is just not a friendly person, a person just whatever, again, barring any medical issues, it's not easy to change. Really not. A person who is a habitually late person to things, they're going to be habitually late. To change that's not easy. So when he tells you here at the beginning of chapter 23, and remember that the second half of the book after chapter 11, things get more difficult. It's not for everyone to be able to accomplish, but we can accomplish some of it. When he says that there are two things that can get you used to doing something, it's not just like, hey, here's what you're going to do, guys. I'm going to give you 2 pages of information, and you're going to be an Anav overnight, Anava for dummies. It's not what this is. It really requires work. Most people, I would tend to believe, are filled with Anava. They're humble. It's the rare person, I think, at least outwardly, that's just a show off and just thinks of themselves so much. Maybe I'm wrong. You can tell me, but that's my perspective has been that at least the people I know, for the most part, I'd say 90% of the people would fall in the category of being enough, of being it. So it's not
deeper than that, because people who are show off
right.
feel very
Insecure. Right, exactly. That's also part of it. That's us. Absolutely true. So let's talk about what he gives us as suggestions. He says, Haregilut v'hahit boneh. Getting used to doing something, and I'll explain that in a minute before he does even, and introspection. What is regilut? It is a concept he has used throughout the book that is also found in Sefer HaChinuch hundreds of times. It tells us in Sefer HaChinuch, the book that reviews every one of the 613 mitzvot and tells us the source of the mitzvah, when it applies, to whom it applies, and how to do it. Very, very, very often he uses the phrase, hold on. Hold on. Hold on. I remember the second half. Oh, man. Oh, that's bad. No. Basically, the idea is that the more you do something outwardly, remember the act as if, and we've spoken about this in Tanya, which is the phrase that comes from AA, from Alcoholics Anonymous, but that's not where they got it from. The act as if, when you say, look, I'm not really into this particular mitzvah, I'm not really a person who gives a lot of tzedakah, but once you start to do it, even your heart's not into it, but the more you do it, it becomes a part of you. It gets internalized. Haregilut v'hahit boneh. So haregilut, what does that mean? She'adam margil atzmo me'at me'at, yitnaheg b'shiflut ha'derech shezacharnu. Slowly start to act with some level of modesty, humility, in the way he's mentioned, which was chapter 22. For example, Yeshivata mekomot hapchutim lalechet besof hachevra. You don't need to be sitting in the front row. You also don't need to be sitting on stage. Just who you associate with also. And if you're with a group, you don't have to be the life of the party, telling one story after another. There's certain people who they just like to hear the stories that they feel are the only important things. I love hearing good stories. I love hearing people talk much more than hearing myself talk. I love it. But there are times when I'm sure this has happened to some of you. You've been into a kiddush, a wedding, or a mitzvah, and someone starts walking, Also a shiva house, which is the worst when this happens. When someone approaches you, and that's it. You're done for the next half an hour. I've actually, now don't take offense because I've never done it to anybody at this table. I'll walk down the street and I'll see someone coming towards me who I definitely don't want to talk to. Yeah, sure. No problem. Okay. It's like I'm on the phone. Hey, how you doing? It's a trick. If you don't know it, use it. I'm not ashamed to say it. Or I will at my oldest daughter's wedding 10 years ago. I have a relative in Israel who was at the wedding, making this very amorphous here. The wedding, a relative, and a guy walked over to him to talk to him. And I knew, my relative did not know this guy, but I knew that this, without exaggeration, this is a 25, 30-minute talk. This is during the Kabbalat Panim, and I know my relative has no desire to talk to him. So I look at him and I said, oh, Uncle so-and-so or cousin so-and-so, they need you for pictures. Oh, okay, catch you later. I said, you owe me a big thank you. He says, I saw that after the first minute already. And then when I saw the video, it wasn't up close, but I could see the two of us, my relative and I talking afterwards. I could see like we both were having a good laugh about it. But I'm not talking about people. There's so many interesting people in this world. But it's when the person thinks that they're the only voice that you want to hear and need to hear. And it happens in a shiva house. When I was sitting shiva for my father over the shul, a guy sat down next to me. There, at least this part was in Chicago, the first half. And there were at least 40, 50 people sitting there. And this guy sits next to me and didn't stop talking for 35 minutes. I didn't even say a thing. And finally, I looked and said, I went like that. Like I got
Maybe
another.
you should say
You know what? I started to, and nothing happened. It didn't change. Right. That's when you take out.
talk about my father.
Yeah. And then he kept bursting in. Yeah, it was terrible. And other people noticed it too. I just gave up. Yeah. There are ways to change conversations. There are definitely ways. Like they teach you, like you're hearing someone start to talk about Lashon Hara, how to divert the situation, to move it to some other topic. Unless, of course, it's interesting. Lashon Hara stuff. Just joking. Oh, I see the battery in my computer's about to die. Very good. So let me just mention a couple of things. We'll cut a couple minutes short. I didn't realize it wasn't charged. Never did that before. Why? When you get used to it this way, you don't become an anav overnight, but slowly it seeps in until it becomes a part of you, becomes connected to you, becomes rooted in you. Since our nature is to be filled with self-importance, why? Why is that our nature? One word, it's not even English. Ego. That's what we have. Our ego, which again in Tanya plays a very part, that's who we are. It's not a bad thing. Ego's a good thing. It's a very good thing. But it's when it gets in our way, it becomes the bigger problem. Then, because of our ego, it's difficult to uproot this natural part of you from its source. Unless you use certain external actions, then and then what will happen is that'll have an effect on you internally. That's not that easily attainable, meaning it's easy in an outward way to change an action. Very simple. Very simple. Let's pretend for a moment I'm in school, I'm a student, and I don't want to go to the class. Oh, my head. Oh, my gosh. Right? Simple. I did it in second grade a lot. Don't ask. Long story. Okay. Oh, my head. Whatever. You can do it simply, right? But to have something internally to change who you are inside, that's a big deal. So like we explained in the concept of zrizut, doing things with alacrity was the word I think we used. All that is included in the following statement. A person doesn't mean naked. It means in this case clever. How do we know that it means clever? The end of Parak Bet in Sefer Bereshit, it says that Adam and Chava were arumim, v'lo yitboshashu. They were naked and they weren't embarrassed. The very next pasuk says in the beginning of Parak Gimel, "V'anachash haya arum mikol whatever." I forgot the next word. But then Nachash was the most naked of all animals? No, it meant he was most clever, trickster. So here it means you have to really use clever devices to do this. You have to work on yourself. You have to come up with methods, devices to be clever with yourself, to figure out how to achieve a level of humility. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure as always. Have a wonderful day. I can tell you are all the best at everything you do. That's not a matter of anava on my part.